Right, good evening and welcome to this first of our series of live streams based on the annual plan. Tonight we're going to be focusing on water, and with me I've got Marty Pacey, who's the manager of the Water Services Department at Council.
Evening.
We've also got several other people in the council team to help with any questions that come through, because we do want to hear from you and get your questions and any comments that you've got there, and make sure that we are being as informative as we can be. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. This video will be obviously recorded and available to be seen online in the future as well. So as we work our way through the various questions and so on, we'll try and answer, if there's multiple questions on a single topic, we'll try and answer them all together, so we're not duplicating ourselves. But yeah, do feel free to pop questions in at any time. Where we're at the moment is, as I said, this is part of the annual plan. Normally we would be doing a long-term plan, but as you may have seen, we've deferred the long-term plan till next year. Essentially, this is kind of like year one of the long-term plan, but it's being done as an annual plan. So we're going to go out and we're going to be talking about what the costs are, what the services are, and so forth over this next year. In the background, though, we'll be thinking about ahead for the following 9 years, and next year we'll come out and consult on that long-term plan. The reason we are doing that is because of water. As you will probably also be aware, the last government was planning a major reform of how water was delivered around the water services were delivered around the country. And they were looking at, first of all, a series of 4 entities across the country. That became 10. And then the government was no longer the government. And so we had a new government come in. They came in on the promise that they would repeal the legislation that had already been passed for the previous reform, and they would replace it. So they've, in their first 100 days, they have repealed the legislation. There's still a few bits that they need to tidy up around that. They have replaced it in a form, but it's not with the assistance that we had been hoping for, and quite frankly that we need. Where we are with the water, though, is that rather than having the 10 entities forced on us, we are in a position where we are talking with our neighbouring regions. For us, we're being as part of Canterbury and Otago, we are certainly having those conversations in both directions. Otago and Southland's a bit more joined up already with their conversations, and there's quite a bit of work happening in that space. The reason we are doing that is because we can't afford to do water on our own. The overall costs over the next 10 years for the capital expenditure that's required is over $400 million. So that would be averaging obviously around $40 million a year. Our total spend in council is somewhere around $65 or $70 million. So that would be quite a major portion of that. And if we were doing that, we simply would have to cut too many other services. So we're working with our neighbours to try and find efficient ways to deliver water, try and get greater size so that we get those efficiencies. We're working together so that perhaps as a larger region entity, that we can employ the people who we currently need to bring in as consultants, because currently we don't have the size for that, but with a region maybe we would. So that's that. If I go back to that number, it is a very large number, and what we're expecting to spend over the next 30 years was perhaps somewhere around $600 or $700 million, possibly more. We haven't done the figures on all of that yet. About 3 years ago, I think it was, the last government came out with their case for change, and that case was based on a Scottish model. And they had someone from the Scottish Water Authority come over, a team, and look at all of our councils across the country, look at what they currently were delivering, and look what they would need to do in the future. That that organisation came up with a figure for Waitaki district of $1.5 billion. So that's around 2 to 3 times what we were expecting at that stage. It's been inflation since then, so there has been some increase in our figure of around 500 million back then, but it's not nowhere near 1.5 billion. We opposed the reforms on that basis, but we did acknowledge at the time something has to change. So even though we didn't like the fact that they were saying it made no sense, basically, that they were saying we need to spend that $1.5 billion, and yeah, we just wanted things to be based on something that was a bit more factual. Anyway, we are where we were at. Probably a good opportunity for me just to ask Marty a couple of questions just around why is the number so large? We're already spending a considerable amount. We've been upgrading a lot of schemes. Marty, perhaps you can explain how much we have spent over the last 3 to 5 years on capital expenditure and upgrading things, and then a wee bit of a background as to why 400 million more.
Thanks, Mikucha. Yeah, so over the last 3 to 5 years, we've been spending generally in the capital space around $12 to $14 million a year. So what we identified is through our long-term planning for the 24-34 LTP, I know it's changed to an annual plan now, that we needed to spend over $400 million. A lot of that work is around, particularly around meeting legislation and standard changes. But in the meantime, our assets continue to age and require replacement. Townships continue to grow, requiring larger assets to meet increasing demand. Projects costs are high due to increased health and safety requirements, ever increasing costs of materials, greater community engagement and the like. What was the other part of the question? What was that?
So what we've been spending, why 400, basically $40 million a year. What are we expecting to spend that on?
So some of the other larger projects that we've got on the go are planning for the future. So there's about, I think, 26 million in there for Oamaru Water, looking at where we need to get our water from in the future. So it's, I think it's a 50-year strategy. So we're looking out to 2070. We're just trying to make sure that we secure water for Waitaki into the future as much as they can.
Mm. So one of the things that we have been looking at is obviously we're talking mostly about drinking water and wastewater. We've also, as part of the 3 waters, is stormwater. So what part does that play in work?
Yeah, good, very good point. So stormwater's been our poor cousin. We pretty much haven't spent any money on it over the last, ever since I've been around, the last couple of decades. We've been doing drinking water upgrades and wastewater upgrades to comply with the resource consents. A decent chunk of this is a work program to sort out stormwater. We have flooding events, and we'd taken the approach in the past to stop raining, water goes away. We are going to take a more proactive approach and actually sort our stormwater network out. I think that's year 5 or 6 in the plan. There's, I think it's about $10 million sitting in there to work that through and do the upgrades that are needed.
Yeah, I get the feeling that won't deliver everything in the way of stormwater. It's a relatively small amount for our network size.
For sure. Top of my head, sort of $100 million Oamaru network. This is just the start of it. It'd have to continue on.
And our resource consent comes up for their wastewater treatment plant, and currently it discharges to land, technically. Yeah. Do you want to talk about that and what the likely future is for wastewater?
Yeah, so our consent expires in about a decade. It could get called in earlier. What the indications are is that we would need to either spray it to a larger parcel of land, like a significantly larger, or have an ocean outfall. It also requires further treatment to allow both of those options. So there'd be treatment, either extra treatment at the start of the process or at the end of the process. But yeah, you're talking tens of millions of dollars as well.
Yeah, I think figure told us at one stage it was around $50 million.
Correct.
Yeah. I mean, there's a real push against discharging to rivers or the ocean, but if it's treated to such a high level that it is, doesn't have a negative impact on the environment, is that going to be okay?
Yeah, correct. So there was an ocean outfall completed reasonably recently up north in the Hawke's Bay area, but it's treated to a very high standard.
Right.
It's almost water when it comes out the other end.
Yeah, yeah, and obviously the technology, Australia uses that a lot, treating wastewater and turning it back into drinking water.
100%. We're have been blessed with lots of land to be able to have large oxidation ponds in the past. They're sort of becoming a thing of the past. So when we go to do the Oamaru wastewater upgrade, for example, we expect to put some mechanical plant in there as opposed to just a biological process being the treatment via a pond.
Yeah, okay. We've got sitting in the background Hampden and even Dundroon, just looking at their wastewater systems. At the moment, Hampden is only on septic tanks, and a lot of people there would like to go to a wastewater system. Is that factored into this next 10 years?
Yes. It's certainly the study to work out whether it's affordable to do it. That's in the first 3 years of the plan. Dundroon has a consent issue with its current discharge, so we are planning to put in a wastewater treatment plant of some sorts. We'll obviously need to consult with the community, and that's sort of in the 4 to 5 year window.
Right. Yeah, just speaking of Hampden, any idea what, off the top of your head, what a wastewater treatment plant might be for the cost?
When we looked at it about a decade ago, the cost per property was, off the top of my head, about $30,000 a property. So you'd at least double that now. But it would allow the town to obviously grow.
Yeah.
So over time, I'm sure they will have a wastewater treatment plant there. It's just whether they have the critical mass to be able to afford it.
Yeah. Okay. We've probably got some questions that we can answer. So let's go. We've got Mandy here who's helping with lead the LTP on the staff side. So Mandy, you've got some questions?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Coacher. There's a couple of questions that have come through this evening so far. So we've got one question which sort of relates to what you were talking before. Is any of the spending going towards stormwater drainage upgrades?
Right. So yes, the answer
Yes.
is yes. And I think that we definitely need to be prioritising that. We will be prioritising it. I live at Western. There's a very small stormwater system there. Some of the gutters go to outlets and it's piped a short way, but I think a lot of people expect that all of the grates around their town or Oamaru all have good pipes underneath them leading away, but that's not always the case.
No, as I say, that stormwater hasn't been a focus since 2002 when we started doing the Oamaru water treatment upgrade. It took 5 years to complete. We had quite a small team there. Now we do have extra resource to be able to prioritise some of these other four cousins, as I said again. So we will move on to some of the things that have been put on the back burner. In the past, there've been massive long lists of things that we must get around to. And now we actually see in the next 10 years that we will get around to doing those things.
Yeah, certainly off the top of the head, North Oamaru is stormwater issues. Odamatata and Marama in recent years have had issues there. Hampden has regular issues. Palmerston, there's no shortage of places that need more work done, and it's at least getting on to do a proper study and identify and prioritise those projects will be a good step forward.
Yeah, so you're right with all the ones you've mentioned, certainly in the north end of Oamaru. That is in our plan to investigate and work out what it is we need to do to stop the flooding that we had a few years back, or reduce it at least. Like our stormwater systems have always been designed to have the roads as a secondary flow path. So the pipes themselves are designed for a 1 and 2 year event generally. We have events more frequently than that, obviously. And the way the design works is the roads flood, and we shouldn't be flooding properties. So that's how they're designed.
Thank you. And that's certainly important. In fact, when look at some of the streets in Amarama last year before, and that's exactly what happened, you know, and people thought it shouldn't be happening, but I think that's part of the communication. That's part of the design. It's a bit like
by design.
A runner park in
Yep.
Oamaru, that is designed to take stormwater and be a collection area for that. Anyway, we'll go back to Mandy for another question.
Thank you. Yeah, I've just got a question here. Will Palmerston get water infrastructure for fire service within the forecasted budget?
That's a very good question. And I need to go to Marty on exactly where we're at, because it's been certainly one of those topics that's been in and out again as we try and figure out. Look, the problem being Palmerston and the surrounding area had 4 water schemes combined together. Doing all of that created extra capacity, and it allowed other properties to join on, which was a big help to the area. But it did create a level of debt, which meant some of the pipe work that might have been done over time hasn't been done as much. We have been investing in that though, but is it getting to firefighting standards?
So when we did some design work on Palmerston reasonably recently in the last year or two, we had designed it for firefighting. What we hadn't done is come to council with a level of service change. So it's not currently a gazetted fire area. I do see it getting firefighting at some stage, and it'll be a discussion point for the LTP in a year's time as to whether we want to spend an extra $4 or $5 million on top of what we had planned. Because we are planning, and we have agreed to replace lots of pipes in Palmerston. Most of those are in the rural areas, just because they're failing quicker than we'd like, and they're costing more to maintain than repair. But there are a few mains in Palmerston town that we will also replace sooner rather than later.
And I think it was around a couple of $1 million that we have allocated as the next step on that.
Yeah, and in the next annual plan year. So we'll do parts of it.
Yeah.
Assuming the annual plan goes through.
Is there some capacity for firefighting in the existing township area?
Yeah, there is some capacity for firefighting, and there's also when the fire trucks go to site, they're full of water as well.
Yeah,
and it generally puts a chunk of it out, and they can connect up to hydrants and draw water if it's available. It just may not be to the volumes that they'd like.
Full pressure.
Full flow rate.
Okay, thank you. Andy.
So we've got another question here. Has a cost analysis been done on both land discharge and sea discharge, factoring in inflation and years? Sea discharge must be more competitive. And then to that, someone else has asked another question. Does that include discharge through private land, like streams already at capacity, like Beach Road? So a lot on that.
Okay. Yeah, so I think it is a trade-off. If we can discharge it all to land, then it doesn't have to be quite to the standard. But if we discharge to sea, then it needs to be a higher standard. So you either treat it more and get rid of it for less, or treat it less and it costs more to get rid of it.
Yeah, the key to think about this here is the soil types that we want to discharge it onto. In some areas it works, like there's a reasonably new discharge field in Palmerston and Waitaki. You'd be talking hundreds, if not 1,000 hectares here in Oamaru for the volumes of water we're talking about, just because of the type of soils we've got loose. It's impermeable generally for the 5,000 cubes of liquid that we'd put on it each day. So the cost benefit analysis, we haven't got that far yet. We've just sort of indicated what a ocean outfall would sort of cost. And it's only a pure budget estimate, plus or minus whatever. Hard to tell until we do that work.
So part of the work is that analysis to define what's the best option.
100% correct.
So no, that will happen. Yes.
So we've got a couple of comments here that you might be able to respond to. So one of them is North Oamaru could be sorted direct piping under the railway line to the sea with easements. Railway line is a natural dam point. And then a further comment to that is North End Muddy Creek is only causes problems and flooding due to no maintenance to the creek bed area. Any comment on that?
Yes, certainly north of Oamaru, we've got those lower Waitaki plains. I think there's issues around the damming effect that the railway has, and that certainly caused problems in the past. And there's been discussions. I think there has been some improvement on some of the culverts going under there, but yeah, I'm not sure whether you've got any more information on that, Marty, and then obviously on Muddy Creek as well.
Yeah, so the damming effect definitely north of Oamaru, not so much Oamaru itself. There are bridges and to get Muddy Creek away, but Muddy Creek did get some attention a few years ago to remove some pinch points. We'd also worked out some estimates on doing exactly what the question was about, as in piping it underneath the railway line directly out to the sea, and that may be one of the solutions that we come out with. There's been background work done on it in the past, and there'll be more when we get to that project in a few years' time.
Yeah, and yeah, it's always a wee bit confusing about where is our responsibility and where is regional council responsibility when it comes to stormwater and natural runoff versus runoff that's accumulated in streets and directed to a particular area because of the gutters and so forth. So can you explain a little more on that?
Yeah, good question. As a general rule, streams or creeks within townships, depending on where it is, are maintained by the property owner. So if there's like a classic example, there's little ones that are dry most of the time, little creeks or streams that get stuff dropped in them over time, and they do cause a damming effect. And we work with the property owners to ensure that they have them cleaned out. Yeah, so the demarcation point for the likes of Muddy Creek, it's a bit of a grey one. ORC is sort of working with us in it. If they were going to spend any decent amount on it, then they would rate for it anyway, and they put a rating area around North End Oamaru.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, no, it's fair enough. And yeah, places like Palmerston have quite a lot of watercourses that go through there. And I think that's been one of the challenges, areas like that, where if that goes through your property, you're responsible for keeping it clear, but not everyone does. And, you know, you can get 9 out of 10 looking after it, and it's going to choke up where that one place is. So we have taken on that responsibility at times and cleared them out.
Yeah, and recovered the cost from the landowner. Yeah. We give them a chance or several chances, and then if it's not happening, then we occasionally step in and recover the cost.
Okay.
So we've had quite a few more questions coming through. One has just asked if you could please explain how an oxidation pond functions. The water lever in the Ohau pond's been allowed to drop in the last 10 years as less water is used to flush the sewer pipes in the village. They're just wondering how that effective level is calculated, if you're aware.
Yeah, we certainly have feedback in the Lake Ohau one of basically needing to use water to keep the volume up, but you'll know much more about that than I do, Mark.
Yeah. Over the years, it must have been about 20 years ago, we actually added a water connection into discharge constantly into the sewer pipe to maintain the oxidation pond. Oxidation pond's a biological process. It needs a certain amount of water in it to function. Over the years, lots more houses connected up, and there were lots more people, and there wasn't such a need. Then as the population's coming back, we will get to a stage where we don't have to add fresh water. It's just one of those quirks.
Yeah, I think, yeah, for those who may not be quite familiar with it, the number of houses was probably around 80 or so in 2020 when they had the big fire there, and some 40 to 50 houses were lost, and yeah, there was a number of permanent residents that left. A lot of the houses are holiday homes though, so they're not always occupied, and so basically you got to build a system that copes for when they are all occupied, but it doesn't run well when there's only, say, 20% of the homes have got people in them. So that's been the problem, and became the problem again when the number of houses actually dropped back. But I believe the number is over 90 homes there now, and the rebuild is continuing. So hopefully that does get a wee bit easier over time.
So we have a couple of related questions that have come in. There's a comment that the pipes are failing in Palmerston in part due to the heavy truck and trailer units using residential streets that aren't designed for heavy traffic. And then further to that, another comment's been made by another listener that's said our rates in Palmerston have gone up by lots in the last few years. So my question is, how much more are we going to get slammed per year to fix Oamaru's water system?
So generally speaking, water and wastewater schemes are all ring fenced. The people who are connected to them pay, and the people who aren't don't. So that's pretty much the system. As I said before, when we did the upgrade of Palmerston, which is probably 8-10 years ago.
Yep.
Pretty much, yeah. That was quite expensive, and so that happened. There was a lot of, I think a lot of the resources that we did have available in your department were spent on doing the water upgrades, a lot of focus on that, not quite so much focus on replacing pipes. We've been rectifying that and getting more pipe work done. The contract we did have in Palmerston, that was for how many million of that? We allocated some of the tranche one funding from the government.
1.5 mil.
Yeah. So we were able to get a reasonable bit of that done, and certainly some of the worst failing pipes were replaced at that time and upgraded where needed. It has been about trying to keep the rates affordable for the people in Palmerston, or that more hasn't been done, but we're getting to that point where we do have to spend more. And unless we start sharing costs across the district in some way, it's going to be very expensive for small communities. We've got 7, I think, water schemes left to upgrade out of the original 24. They're all small ones, and the cost of those range from $1.5 million to around $4.5 million. That's a lot of money per consumer on those schemes, and it's certainly something that we have to figure out how we're going to afford, how the ratepayers are going to afford that, both on an individual basis and as a district. But it is one of the questions we're actually asking in the consultation document. So when that does come out, hopefully people will be able to respond to that. And it's looking at, do we keep the system the way it is? Do we look at the other end of the spectrum, where if you're on a water supply, you pay the same as anyone else on the district, or is it somewhere in the middle where you pay a good chunk of what the cost is for your area, and the rest of it gets shared around if it's too high. So that's that. But
yeah, to just add, there's one of the other projects which was recently undertaken in Palmerston and is just hitting on rates, is the wastewater treatment upgrade. So part of the resource consent requirements, we needed to do a new disposal field. So we spent about $1 million there as well. So there's some, the Wahima area in Palmerston have had their projects, their large projects to do with drinking water standards and regional council resource consent requirements done early. So they've been done now already. So I don't see a larger chunk come out of our work program for that area.
Yeah, so $1 million in Palmerston. I'm not sure how many residents properties there are, but it's whether it's 400 or 500, but basically that's $2,000 to $2,500. Those are always loan funded, so that they're paid off over time, and it makes a bit less of an impact. But if it's $2,500 and you're paying that off over 20 years, that's probably another $150 a year that you're paying just for that bit of work. It's very ballpark numbers I'm using there, but it gives hopefully an indication of what the situation is. Mandy, another one?
Yeah, I've got a question here. There's a few more that have come in, but it's a comment regarding the comment made earlier about Beach Road stormwater is discarded through private land and small creek system, which gets water from a lot of the South Hill. Council don't maintain the creek. Will this change as the volume exceeds the capacity at present?
You know where they're talking?
Yeah, I know exactly where they're talking. Whether it does or not is probably a policy decision we would need to make. Currently, it's not maintained by us, required to be maintained by the property owner. Those sorts of streams and creeks will be included in the study we do on what we need for stormwater in the larger Oamaru area, but that's not for a few years yet.
Yeah, and I think what we're seeing is an increasing need for council to take care of some of those things. That make sure it gets done, but on the other hand, it costs, and that's the challenge we have. But yeah, it's a bit hard to expect that just the property owner will bear the brunt of that. So it's trying to find the right balance for that one.
We have a question here from one of the listeners that's just said, I'd like to know if you're using our private property as collateral for the loans that you're taking out.
No. It's a question that's commonly asked in recent times, and it's based on a repeated myth that the local government funding agency, which most councils borrow from now, that we use your properties to secure against. The reality is that the security that councils have is the power to rate people, and so we can require people to pay rates, and as draconian as that sounds, I mean that's the reality of the situation. There are limits to how much we can actually borrow based on our overall revenue, so that's a factor that's taken into consideration and put some control on councils. For many councils, the water is a major issue for them. For some councils, they are at their debt ceilings now, which if they don't have a credit rating, that's 175% of their overall revenue is how much they can borrow. For the councils that do go through a credit rating process with an approved international credit rating agency, I believe it's 225% or 240%. I mean, we don't want to get there. We are facing challenges with the cost of water as everyone else is. So again, we need to try and figure out how we deal with that. But essentially, we're not using people's property for security. We've got $1 billion of assets of our own, and we've got the power to rate people overall. That ensures that we are able to take those loans out for things that they are appropriate for.
Thank you, Mayor Kercher. We've got a couple of questions that have come through, two online and one actually that we received earlier ahead of the session, just regarding Ohau's water. So one comment here, Tasman Council has allowed UV filtration for a small village with similar number of residents, including campground to Ohau. It would be significantly cheaper for this to occur in Ohau and other smaller towns. What would be your response to that? And I'll just add a little bit more. Someone else has asked what is proposed for the Lake Ohau Alpine Village water supply. And as I said, previously submitted, someone asked, what about the drinking water at Lake Ohau?
Okay. Yeah, there's a number of factors that come into Lake Ohau. One is the actual take. Where the water is taken from and what the allowance is for that, and there's question marks around whether that take is the consent for that is being met or not. So there's a consideration. There is a requirement to treat, and Christchurch has gone through a very big debate about needing to treat the air water. They get their water from the ground. It's very good water, but there's no protection against some of the bacteria and so on that creates problems and can end up, seriously making people seriously sick or even killing people. So they have been fighting against chlorination, which is one of the main tools around that. And I don't believe they've been able to win that particular fight. It's a similar argument that the our village residents use, and it's a similar answer, I'm afraid. We are required to put certain protections in place. At the moment, when you drive into Lake Ohau village, there's a sign on the post which says you've got to boil all the drinking water. I used to think it was acceptable to have boil water notices on rural schemes and so on, but become very aware that no, it's not. And having a notice up is not protection for people if something goes wrong.
And Manny's going to ask a question about home filtration versus water treatment. Sorry, that was my spidey sense. So the thing is, it could be a solution on very small supplies to have treatment at the point of supply being at the house itself. The issue with some of these medium supplies is the quality of the water to start with. The filters at the house, filters in UV, have to have the water to a certain standard to be able to treat it to comply. So what we find is in the issues is in option studies that we do for these supplies while we're doing the drinking water upgrades is we look at that as an option. But what we've found is most of the time they need pre-treatment for the bulk of the supply for the times when the creek or surface take is dirty. So it ends up being you sort of got a partial treatment for the whole supply and then costly treatment at the individual households. So in the instance of O-Health, for example, it makes sense to treat the whole supply. It's just more cost effective overall.
Yeah, I think it used to be that Ministry of Health was the regulator for drinking water standards. And to be fair, I think they were too busy fixing people in other ways to worry too much about that. And so it didn't really that job didn't really get done. Taumata ROI was set up by the last government to take on that role, and they take it much more seriously. All of this came out of the Havelock North situation where they had a underground water take that was supposed to be basically bulletproof. Turned out it wasn't, and 5,000 people got sick, and reportedly several people may have died from that. So that's the challenge that we've had since that time, is making sure that actually there's very much a risk-based approach of manage the risk so that it's not going to end up with people getting sick. Point of use, treatment and so forth is referred to quite regularly. We're actually looking at basically Taumata ROI have what they call acceptable solutions, and so we want to make sure that we explore that thoroughly, particularly on some of our rural schemes where there might be 25 houses on a scheme, but 80% of the water is drunk by stock, and they don't need the treated water, whereas the houses do. So looking at whether those might be, as Mother ROI says, acceptable solutions, and the ins and outs of that. We've actually invited Alan Pragnell, who's the CE of Taumata ROI, to come and give us a bit more of a briefing around some of those options and look at the requirements overall, and make sure that we have a very clear picture of what our options are around some of those things. So he is coming. We just need to set a date for that for councillors to have that briefing. Corridale Water is a company that operates 4 of our drinking water supplies, and they've also been in contact with Taumata ROI, a lot of contact with the water team, because they've got their 4 schemes which all need upgraded, and whether some of those, 1 or 2 or 3, whatever, can be treated on a more point of use, or point of entry, basis, it would be interesting. Bearing in mind that, you know, if there's a couple of houses on a farm, each of those houses will need that same treatment as well. So yeah, looking at, you know, I mean, we're facing a major cost here, and anything that helps reduce that cost and still deliver the quality that we need needs to be considered.
So directly related to that, Mikucha, we've got a couple of questions here. One's come in tonight and one's also been previously submitted. One of the questions is, so has council considered funding farmers to build separate stock water systems? And relative to what you've been talking about as well, comment that in some rural areas, most of the water supplied is used for stock water. Are you considering separate house filtration as water enters the home rather than at the water intake where the water will still sit in tanks and have the potential to become contaminated for humans? We've got our own system in place from this reader and it works well and it's not expensive to maintain with new filters and UV lights every year. So it expands on what you were saying earlier, but any comment to that?
Yeah, I think from managing the risk for our team, it's if we're allowing that, it's how do we ensure that the UV lights and the filters are changed out when they're supposed to be. So that there's just a bit of operational stuff there, which you know, it just needs to make sure that that happens. What was the first bit of that? Sorry, there was the. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So for, on that other one, you know, you mentioned water tanks, and you know, a modern water tank that's properly sealed and so forth is probably pretty much okay. An old concrete tank which may have yeah, poorly fitting lid or something like that, it can create risks and so on. So there is definitely a problem there if the treatment has happened before the water goes into the tank and then potentially could get contaminated there. So there is a whole setup, and into Mud ROI's acceptable solutions document, there's actually a whole set of layouts about how to manage those types of situations. So that's there. As far as funding farmers to set up a separate stock water system, we haven't considered that. I think we are open to consider anything that might help bring the cost down. But generally speaking, it's going to be it's not the stock water. It's the actual drinking water that's the concern, and yeah, there's a certain amount of economics that comes into it. If you run two whole systems of pipes, one with drinking water and one with stock water, there comes a point where actually that becomes more costly than actually just treating all of the water. So is that something that is looked at though, Marty, as an option?
Certainly, we're yes, short answer. It doesn't tend to get anywhere near stacking up, just because it's actually just easier to find a cleaner source and put in some sort of treatment. It is something that on maybe one or two of the very small suppliers, it could be an option.
Okay. Thank you.
So we've got a question here. How much, prior to the repeal, how much would the cost have been to ratepayers to fit the bill to meet the standards that were set by government?
Sorry.
So prior to the repeal of the Waters Act, how much would it have cost ratepayers to fit the bill to meet the standards that are set by government?
Yeah, well, yeah, very, very good question. Along the way, I did describe some of the efficiencies that were projected as being slightly heroic, just because, yeah, it didn't quite stack up, but certainly it was going to be, it was pitched to be extremely cheaper. The reality is, even if it was 20% cheaper, 10% cheaper, it's still better than the situation we're facing at the moment. So it's really around, there's several parts to it. One is having the greater capacity overall, being able to employ all of the people that you need to design all of these things and not have to farm everything, or, you know, so the more technical stuff out to consultants. it's about the efficiency of managing much larger contracts and you know what can be saved there. It's also about standardization. So looking at, rather than bespoke solutions to every problem, having a set of solutions that are ready to go. So you know there are things that would come from having a large entity running water. It doesn't mean it won't happen. It might be just that it's us working with the rest of Canterbury or us working with the Otago and Southland that helps to bring that size. But it's none of us have got a silver bullet on that. Christchurch is in a really good position, as is Seoul and Waimakariri. A lot of their infrastructure is relatively new because it's either been built as part of expansion or it's been built as repairs to the earthquake situation. So they are all in quite a good position, plus they've got very large populations between the three of them. The rest of us, not so much. So that's part of the challenge of how to work with others. When we were proposed to work with we had the option of going with Otago and Southland or going with Canterbury and West Coast. We went with Canterbury and West Coast because that was going to bring the greatest mass and the greatest benefit to us. And as much as we didn't want to say no thanks to our Otago friends, they totally understood that it's about trying to get the best deal for the ratepayers. Now we're in a situation where some of those big players aren't required to play ball, and why would they necessarily? But having said that, we are having discussions with pretty much all of the different councils across those areas. Hopefully we'll get a solution on that.
Thank you. So we've got a few more questions that have come in. Let's go back to the earlier conversation. Are you saying that you are no longer promoting bores for OHAL? And also, what about unapproved connections?
I'll do the OHAL one to start with. Yeah, so at this point in time, we've got till December to comply with Te Mata Arawa's requirements. So we're not promoting bores at this time. It would be a treatment system which will treat the surface water in the interim, because what we were required to do is install filters in a barrier. It might not be compliant all the time, but it's compliant to Mata Arawa's requirements.
I think if there's unauthorised connections on whatever scheme, we probably need to know about it.
100%, yeah, and we'll follow up and recover costs from the person who's made the illegal connection.
Yeah, likewise with people on restrictors. Yeah, occasionally we do some inspections and find that some of the restrictors are missing or maybe have been drilled out. I think that's still a thing, is it? So yeah, it can be a problem because lines are built for a certain capacity, and if someone's actually taking more water at once, you know, if they're using a lot of water and filling their tank up and it's feeding in more than what their allowance should be, it's taking water from being able to fill up neighbours' tanks and so on. So it is important that, you know, people play the game properly on this one, and yeah, otherwise we end up with water shortages, people without water, and that becomes even more costly problem.
So we've got a couple of unrelated questions that have come through, but I'll probably put them out there together. So is there a physical breakdown of the costs on our 10-year plan, i.e. how much is physical work, pipes in the ground, and how much is bureaucratic or compliance work? It would be interesting to see. And then as a different comment altogether, but one you could talk about at the same time, in Australia, many councils now insist that new build residences feature rainwater catchments and use in property grey water systems. Is this something that Waitaki Council can consider and implement?
Okay, just on that last one, address that one first. It's not something we're considering directly, but one of the components of the reforms was essentially that everyone would over time move to metered water, and there's no doubt that there's significant water savings when people do that. If it was to happen, I think yeah, my personal preference is to have an allowance that everyone pays for, and if they go over that, so that's paid through their rates on. And that would be plenty for someone on their own or a couple or whatever. But if they go over that, then they have to pay extra. And what's usually found is when meters are introduced, water usage drops by about a quarter. If we look at some of the work we've done recently in Oamaru, we've got spent around $6 million on being able to treat more water more quickly, and also an extra storage tank, so we're able to store twice as much up at the reservoir. And right at the moment, we're putting an extra tank up on the South Hill so that the treated water can also go to there, and rather than have 10 hours of water supply, we're going to have about 24 hours of water supply. So if something goes wrong, there's a greater amount of water there. So both of those things are needed because we're using as much water as we're using. But if you can imagine, if we dropped our water usage by a quarter, then that 24 hours becomes 30 hours of water supply. And, we don't need to build as much extra work in there. So that is part of, I guess, the savings as well, which I didn't mention earlier. And the first part?
Yeah, I got the first part. The round the split between compliance and pipes in the ground. So compliance is about 30% of the work program. It's quite hard to strip compliance out of when you also include growth. If you include growth in the compliance, so you're going to build it to a standard that complies, but also allows for 20 years' time. That would be considerably more than half if you had compliance and growth as opposed to pipes in the ground.
Yeah, so what we'll have in the somewhere in the annual plan part of it, we'll show this next year of what the projects are that are being proposed and what the costs overall are for each project. Some of them are reasonable estimates, and more work has to be done on them because we're not in a position where we go and get them fully planned out and then put the cost in. So being engineers, I'm sure there's reasonable conservatism and making sure that there's enough money budgeted there, and hopefully they come in under cost. But each of those projects, there's going to be an element of management by the water team. There'll be consultants included in there, and there'll be the actual physical work. So that list will be available. I'm not sure whether we'd be having the full 10 years of projects showing, but I think it probably will be a good idea to at least give people the indication of what's coming. So, because at the moment we've really tried to be quite tight on this next 3 years, but the problem is that it just pushes out some of the work that needs to be done. And if we keep to around $15-20 million or whatever each year for the next 3 years, the following years become much higher. So we don't want to be kicking too many cans down the road. We've been pretty good with what we've done, and we've got some good infrastructure, but with everything else that still needs to be done on that to-do list that Marty was talking about before, and the new standards that are coming in, there's a lot of cost, and the more we kick down the road, the bigger the challenge is going to be at the other end. So we're doing our best to manage it, and we want to be as clear and transparent as possible on this. So we'll have a chat about whether the 10 years of projects can go up as part of the context for this next 12 months from the 1st of July. Next one, Mandy.
So we've got a bit of a combined question here from two different areas though, but are we going to end up with water meters? And then further to that, another person's asked, with regard to OHAL, why not install water meters for all connections, and a proven containerised water treatment plant is available from Timaru Company? Why not install now and clean the 8 storage tanks that haven't been cleaned for some time?
Okay, containerised solutions are certainly one of the options, and I think our team is looking at them. I've also had the Mayor of Queenstown state quite boldly, blatantly, they are doing everything they can to get every containerised water treatment plant for themselves, because they've got all their challenges themselves. Obviously, they've had the crypto sporidium outbreak recently, which they've still never identified exactly where that's happened, but obviously it's brought everything front of mind for them. And yeah, but so those containerized solutions are definitely there. We're definitely looking at them. I'm not sure if we've got any ordered, Marty, but they are. We are looking at.
Yeah, for sure. That's a likely solution for a couple of the supplies. OHA is one of them, and that's just an interim treatment process to comply with Mata ROI's requirements.
Right.
What happens in the future, we'll see. Yeah,
I think at the moment we're not planning meters. I don't think that's part of any of the projects, but yeah, I think it has to be a solution. They do work. It's more cost as far as putting them in, but if it saves some of the major capital work,
yeah,
that's a conversation we need to have with the community in the future. At the moment, some users are metered, so particularly the higher water users, motels and hostels and some factories and various things like that have metered water already, and they pay how much a meter roughly for Oamaru?
$1.20 or 30.
Yeah. Which $1.20 or $1.30, which doesn't sound like much, but it's it does mean that they use the water a bit more sparingly, perhaps. Lastly, the OHA 8 tanks not being cleaned. It's something that's mentioned regularly. Want to comment on that one?
Yeah, well, the source isn't treated, so cleaning the tanks wouldn't necessarily achieve much.
Right.
Because it's still taking the water from a catchment which has animals in it.
Yeah.
Like OHAL, there was a question around meters for OHAL. OHAL's resource consent is currently consented only allows for restricted use, doesn't allow for meters or on demand. It's something I'm going to have to work through when we do the water upgrade. So we'd have to get a new consent for OHAL, which could be problematic.
Yeah, because one of the challenges is knowing exactly how much we are taking.
Yeah,
and are we meeting the consent conditions on that? So without being, so too much more than that, yeah, it will be problematic. We'll need a consent from or new consent from ECAN to allow anything other than restrictors.
So we're getting a number of questions coming through asking the question, are we getting fluoride in our water in North Otago? And some people have suggested that it's already there.
Okay. We've been directed by the Director General of Health to put fluoride in the Oamaru water supply. We applied and received 500,000, I think it was, from the government to pay for it. Because we didn't think it should be our ratepayers that are paying for that. It is ready to go. It is not going yet. I don't think we own a teaspoon of fluoride to put in it.
Correct.
So water is not being fluoridated. We've said we will let people know when that happens. We are waiting for clarification from the Director General of Health that they have ticked the boxes that they're supposed to tick around the original direction, and once they let us know whether that's happening or not, we will know what's happening. So it is ready to go. People have asked, are we getting asking for an extension? We can't really ask for an extension because it is ready to go. It's not a case of we're not ready for it. So that's the situation at the moment, and we've got a petition being presented to council next Tuesday. We'll be receiving that officially, yeah, that's where we're at. Essentially, though, this is not council's decision. This is a decision by the Director General, and as we've said often, people need to direct their feedback to the Ministry of Health and the Director General in particular.
Thank you, Mayor Kircher. So we've got a different question here regarding the Hampton sewage. Is the engineering study and cost estimate publicly available by any chance?
So we haven't done a revised engineering estimate. There was some work done, as I say, more than a decade ago. It didn't go into any detail, so it's not available.
Yeah, We had hoped that, and we had said that it would have happened by now, but unfortunately there's been so much other things have been happening that it hasn't been prioritised. I think councillors and I are keen that it does get prioritised, and that's a part of the discussion we need to have, but maybe not something that Marty was keen to hear. But yeah, I think it is a problem. Hendon could expand. At the moment with septic tanks, they need to have certain size property. If they didn't need to have those septic tanks, not only would it improve the environment and take away a reasonable health risk, it would also allow more development within that Hendon village. So there's some real benefits there. If we were putting a water treatment plant in there, it wouldn't be just for the houses that are there, it would be for what the expected growth would be over time. And that could quite easily double. It may be more people living there, maybe more holiday homes, but if everyone who can contribute, the greater the number of it, the more the cost is shared. So that's something we'll be looking at, and conversation for us to have, Marty.
Look forward to it.
Yeah.
So just looking at one of the questions that was raised earlier prior to this session, you've answered part of it, but just wanted to put it out there clearly. When setting the charge out rate, will council strive to have a water rates collection similar or slightly greater to that achieved with the current fixed charges? This would be a fair user pay system, as low users would have a decrease from the current payment and high users would have an increase. I think you've sort of covered that.
Yeah, I think at the moment it is an averaged cost. So if we introduce a system where there is a base amount that people pay for, that would be lower, I expect, because we are going to get the people who use more paying more. So if the challenge, I guess the question is, if we were using the same overall, we need to collect the same amount of money plus the cost of metering, because that will be an additional cost. But if we save a whole lot of volume of water and there's a cost saving in that, then that offsets some of that. So at the moment it still needs to be determined exactly how it would work. Some councils meter, and every litre you use you're paying for. Others have that allowance and then pay for anything over and above. So we just need to decide on how we do that. I don't know, do any have like a 3-tier, like if you're a low user you pay something, if you're a higher user you pay a bit more, and then you meet it after that?
That's certainly not currently. The way it works is there's a rate credit equal to what a normal residential person would pay, and you get that volume of water free effectively. It is something we would consider. If we did go down that track, it might be that the high users get a higher rate to try and get them to use less.
Yeah. No, thank you.
So further to that, you just talked about the metering. Person sort of asked, implementation of metering elsewhere has shown that savvy consumers decrease their water usage and wastage, or maybe identify repairs and leaks. That's a really good thing, but how would council actually address the shortfall of actual income versus budget?
Yeah, it is a case of averaging the overall cost against the overall use, and so that is the aspect. It's trying to find what savings we can find out of the lower amount of water that's required. Pumps won't be running as much, filters won't need to be changed over as often, and things like that. So there are those aspects. Anything else you want to add to that?
It's a straight if it costs a certain amount. Obviously, there's some variable cost, pumping, that sort of stuff, electricity, but there's still infrastructure on the ground that still needs to be maintained. So what would happen is if you reduce the consumption, then the water meter rate would go up slightly to cover the costs of operating the supply, less the savings we've made.
And I think people get a bit concerned that they're going to have to pay a real fortune for it. But when you consider how much, basically a cubic metre of water, if it costs currently $1.20 on a metre, it's 1,000 litres, that for a person living on their own, that might be 2 days use. So, the overall cost is still relatively cheap. It is setting up the system with obviously installing meters, and then depending on how they are read and how the billing happens as to that extra administration cost.
Yeah, correct. Because there's extra assets that we need to install and maintain as well. So they might even out.
So one person said, just putting it out there, if water is such a great worry, and it is, then why are you throwing a cost of a new event centre on our rates as well as wishes over needs? Possibly?
No, very good question. And again, one that we've been asked a number of times. I did had some comments in my column in the Honorary Mail. I'm trying to think when it was, but I think it was maybe 4 weeks ago, just about the need to make sure that we are looking, at reasons why people want to live here. There's the old adage that, no one moves to an area because they've got a good septic or sewage system. And, people might move away because they've got a bad one, but actually people move here for quality of life. And one of the things that we want to do is make sure that we've got reasons why people want to be here. And it goes beyond infrastructure. It goes to the amenities we've got, the lifestyle we've got, the ability to play the sports that they want to, or have the events that they want to see. So that's part of the reason. And we have a good chunk of the community that very much wants it. Not everyone does. We get that. It's pretty much the same for any service that we have. A lot of people don't use the library. Most people are quite happy to pay for it anyway. And the sports and event centre would be a similar thing. But if we don't keep investing in the things that actually help bring people here, then we'll have fewer people paying for it, and the more we can share that cost out, the better it is. So that's part of it. Councils are here to deliver on the 4 well-beings, as it's put in the Local Government Act, and it's looking after the economic, the cultural, social, and the environmental aspects of people's lives, and we want to make sure that we are doing that. For the same reasons that we provide dog parks, the same reasons we provide playgrounds, the same reasons why we provide libraries and aquatic centre. It's all about having good things that people want to be here for, and make sure that they've got those services. So I know that won't satisfy everyone who's listening to that, but that's the basis on why we're doing it.
So I've got an earlier comment, just the mud tanks in Palmerston fill up with the gravel from the shoddy road and footpath repairs. Is there any comment to that?
I think if that's happening, we ask that you put a customer request in. If you can use the Snap Send Solve app, if you're seeing something like that happening, take a photo of it and send it through the app, or else give the council a phone call. We shouldn't be doing shoddy repairs that could cause other problems, and so it'd be good to make sure you do report those situations when they happen.
So we have a similar sort of line. We've got someone asking why the drains in Western aren't being cleaned out by the contractors. They're finding themselves cleaning them out regularly, and their neighbours doing the same.
Yeah, again, if you've got a concern about that, please do report them. Really appreciate the fact that actually around the district, we've got a lot of people who do take the trouble to clean out the drain that's near them, and that just takes pressure off the contractors. But if you think that something's not being done, that absolutely should be getting done. And particularly, we don't want people going putting themselves at risk if it's not a safe thing to be doing, or you're not it's not something you should be doing. Please do get in touch with the council and let us know.
Thank you. So we've got a further comment to the Hampden Sewerage. If you haven't done an engineering and cost study, how does Waitaki District Council come to its estimate of 30k per property? Topographical, most Hampden residences are positioned on an elevation. A gravity sewage system would be perfect for most of those homes.
Yeah, obviously the pipes and so on are going to cost a certain amount, but it's really the treatment itself and the disposal what's left over at the end of that, can be the costly part. As far as the estimate, as Marty said, we did do a study some time ago, and that was the figure that was arrived at was around 30. He quite rightly has said that time has passed, and it's probably closer to double that figure.
Yeah, that's what the study would inform. Would also probably require upgrading of Meraki's wastewater treatment plant as well, because the logical thing would be to have it at one point. There's only a certain amount of land where you can discharge that's suitable for a discharge. So it certainly costs more than that now.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be great to be able to just go into a shop and buy wastewater treatment plant from them, and it just isn't the way it is. As I said before, one of the opportunities that we do have is to try and get more standardization in these things. So there's a certain amount of work has to go into exploring a particular location, and with Hamden, the soils there are different again, and a bit problematic as far as getting water to soak away and so forth. But if if there was that study was done, and we had basically half a dozen designs that are used right around the South Island, and we say, well, this is the type of design we need, then the plans are pretty much done. We don't have to go and plan a whole new setup, but we still have to construct it, of course. But again, it's about trying to standardise the pipes that are used, the pumps that are used, and those sorts of things. So you have options, but they are standard options. So they are just expensive things, unfortunately.
Just had a number of further comments coming through regarding fluoride, stating that it's your decision regarding fluoride. You're here for your community, which means what's doing is best for that community, and that sort of thing. Is there anything that you want to make regarding that?
We want to do the right thing by our community, and we know there are a number of people who are very concerned in our community around that. We also know that we have an obligation to all of our community. Many people aren't concerned. That's just the way it is. But we also know that if we don't comply with the direction, then we are liable for a fine of up to $10,000 a day. There's 500 people signed petition. I'm not sure whether they are all local or not, but those 500 people were willing to pay that $10,000 a day. Then it would be helpful if they told us that. But at the moment, we've got a direction. It's if I go on the highway and where the speed limit is 100 and I go 120, I might think I'm in the right, but I'm not, and I'll get fined. So the same thing. If we don't do what we are directed to by law, then that's what the consequence is, and we'll have to pay that. So that's part of the consideration. Again, it is the Director General that makes the decision. We would not be the first council that was essentially fired and commissioners put in who would get on and do the whatever anyway. So that's the way it is. It's the reality, and we've all got rules that we've got to live by. That's one of the ones that we've been given.
Thank you, Mayor Kircher. So going back to a previous conversation around the costs, there's been a comment that says by spreading the cost, you unfairly disadvantage certain groups. And further, the same person said it's a bit high for use of 1,000 litres for 2 days for a single person, wouldn't it be?
I think it's 600 litres a day for it's sorry, was it 1,800 litres a day for a point of water in a rural scheme. So that's using for a household, and if they got pets or whatever it might be, that's using the water for. I know from personal experience that we use much less than that. And most people would use much less than that. And so if it's someone on their own, yes, I don't even think they would be using 500 litres unless they were watering the garden a bit as well. But it's trying to average that out.
Yeah, so in Oamaru, when we designed the supply, we allowed for about 1,000 litres a household, which is 2.1 people by average. So about 400 or 500 litres for an individual averaged out across. Some will use far more, irrigating lawns and footpaths and the like. Some will use far less, correct?
Yeah, I think, increasingly the seeing someone's sprinkler going and watering their lawn, but also all their footpath and the water running down the gutter and so on. I mean, it's an absolute waste of water, and those are things that we need to be also stepping up on. One of the things just before I was thinking about, someone did mention in a question that if we've got meters, then we do pick up leaks and issues better, and that is absolutely the case. If we know how much water is going down a particular pipeline and know how much water is being used at each property, that gives us a pretty good idea that if there's leaks along the way, there might be a leak on the property which may not be discovered, but that's again, having metered water does sometimes bring that to their attention, particularly if it's a large leak. And we do have those from time to time, and we've dealt with them in different ways, trying to be as fair as we can, being mindful that trying to get that equity in there, and some of the people who can least afford to use a lot of water may be the ones who have to use a lot of water. So we look at are there other ways that we can deal with that particular issue.
So a question that was sent through earlier, how has the estimated 426 million or so over 10 years blown out from council's estimates of between 250 million to 415 million over 30 years, depending on scenario A or B, which council stated in a letter to Nania Mahuta in 2021?
Essentially, as I said before, what we're looking at is several things. One is changing standards. So what our estimates were based on then is really before Taumata ROI was really getting into gear. So the requirements are a lot clearer now, and I think that's helped bring some clarity to us around the what needs to be done. And the other is construction inflation, and we know that has been quite immense, particularly in the water space, because so many councils are trying to do so much to catch up on where things need to be, and trying to get ahead of things for the future. So yes, it's we've used a range of figures. I've talked about 300 to 500 million over the 30 years. At the moment we're looking at something that's a bit more concrete. We know we can't actually afford $426 million over 10 years. So we've got to figure out how we actually reduce that. But that is part of the problem, and we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to actually reduce the cost.
So we've got a question here. Do councils have any creative ideas for leveraging debt by working with other councils still?
Local government funding agency is essentially that. It is one of the cheapest cost of borrowing that we can access, and that's why I think it's gotten so popular with. I mean, it is set up for local government. It's in the name, but it is that is the one that most of us are using. There has been some work done on particularly for the likes of Auckland and some of the other metros where their borrowing is immense, trying to get setting up like a bonds type system with their citizens being able to invest into that and getting a return. There's potential for some of those sorts of things. Local government funding agency, it was only a couple of years ago, we were getting money for less than 1% for quite a bit of it, but now it's around 6%. So some is a wee bit lower and some is a bit higher than that, but around about that. So that's where we are at. Queenstown Lakes is basically in 10 years' time they're looking at having $1 billion of debt. and like us, trying to figure out how they avoid that, because that's not affordable for that community. Some councils are at their debt ceilings now. Ruapehu District Council would be one of those ones where, they really don't have much capacity at all to borrow anymore. And so, those are the challenges. We keep working on trying to find all the solutions we can. And that's, I can't say more than that, really. It's everything is being looked at.
So it's just a question, is there still going to be a public meeting on the subject of fluoride? And if so, when will that be?
Well, we weren't going to have a public meeting. We talked about having a webinar. At the moment, we're actually focused on the long-term plan. The fluoride issue is in the hands of the Ministry of Health and in the whatever process that they are doing. So as much as we said we'll have a webinar, we've had requests from everything from a meeting to a 3-day forum and all those sorts of things. I mean, those are not in our purview. They, if people want to object, they need to object to the decision maker, which is the Director General of Health. Can you use your microphone?
Sorry, just checking. I've got one question here that I've just lost right now. It is understandable, and I don't understand the context of this, so it's come in a few minutes ago, but it's understandable that measuring a limit of 2.2 litres per second is challenging. Have you approached ECAN to agree to 7,920 litres per hour, which should be easier to verify at the OHAL infiltration gallery?
Is that from Kay? They go here.
That'll be addressed as part of the water treatment upgrade.
Next one.
We have a lull. I'm just going back and checking that we've
Okay.
covered most of them.
Right. Well, we're we're definitely over time. So it might be a good spot to say, basically to wind up. But thank you very much to everyone who's been watching, and thanks for the questions. And I know, we've tried to answer them as best we can. And some of them definitely need a bit more of a response along the way. But if there are any other questions that do come through, they'll get answered online, I believe, because we want to try and answer all the questions we can along the way and make sure that everything is as clear as possible. We do ask that when the consultation document comes out, that you do have a look at that and do think about some of this hopefully, and make some comments back in there as feedback to submissions to the annual plan. But do understand that councillors, myself, the staff, we are working hard to try and find solutions to some of the problems we've got in front of us. We're all passionate about our Waitaki community, and we actually want to make sure that it works for everyone as best as possible, that we're delivering on what we have to deliver, and we're giving people the things that they want and makes the life special in our district. So anyway, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll be doing another one of these. Mandy, tell us when. Sorry?
The next one will be on the 2nd of April.
2nd of April, and we're going to be talking about
That one will be on roading.
roading. Excellent. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks,
Catch you
guys.
later.
Cheers.